Falling in love has a very particular quality to it that is difficult to describe and almost impossible to mistake. There is a heightened attention, an awareness of another person that colors everything else, that makes ordinary moments feel charged with significance simply because they involve this person. There is the pull toward proximity, toward knowing, toward being known in return. There is the way their absence registers as a kind of lack, and their presence as a restoration of something that was missing. There is the monitoring, the reading of moods, the parsing of messages, the small adjustments made constantly in response to signals that only matter because they matter so much. And underneath all of it, running quietly, is a current of anxiety. The awareness that this could be lost, that the feeling depends on something outside of yourself that you cannot fully control. This is what we have always called love, and it is one of the most vivid experiences available to human beings. Poets have been trying to capture it for as long as there have been poets, without ever quite finishing the job. But what if this isn't love at all? What if this feeling, as consuming and as real as it is something else entirely? Something that arrives with all the intensity of love, that feels from the inside indistinguishable from love, but is really just masquerading as love, in part because we never had the words to tell them apart. What if love, in the truest sense of the word, is something we have barely begun to understand? Buddhism has a very precise answer to that question, and it starts with a single word. That word is tanha. It comes from Pali, the language in which the earliest Buddhist teachings were recorded, and it is usually translated into English as craving or desire. But the translation loses something important, because the original meaning of tanha is not desire in the abstract. It is thirst. The specific physical pull that the body has before thought arrives, before choice is possible. You do not decide to be thirsty. The thirst is simply there, and everything else follows from it. The Buddha used that word to describe a quality of wanting, the kind that is rooted not in genuine care for another person, but in what that person gives you, the feeling they produce, the need they fill, the sense of yourself that becomes possible when they love you back. Tanha is the love that is fundamentally about the self, even when it is directed toward another person. And what makes tanha so worth understanding is what it does over time. Thirst is, by its nature, insatiable. You can drink and feel satisfied, but the thirst always returns. It cannot be permanently resolved, only temporarily relieved. Love that is built on tanha has this same quality. The reassurance that felt like enough yesterday needs to be given again today. The closeness that satisfied last week is not quite enough this week. The anxiety that gets soothed by one conversation comes back before the next one. This is not a flaw in the people involved. It is simply the nature of trying to fill a need through another person. The need keeps reasserting itself, because needs do, and the relationship slowly organizes itself around managing that cycle, rather than around the two people in it. Tanha has a recognizable shape in a relationship. There is the need for constant reassurance, the anxiety that quiets temporarily and always returns. There is the jealousy that presents itself as caring, that says, I just worry about you, while meaning I need to know you're mine. There is the tendency to love the idea of a person more than the actual person, to build a version of them in your mind that fits what you need, and then feel genuinely betrayed when the real person turns out to be different. And there is the love that is warm and generous right up until the moment it stops receiving what it needs, at which point something changes. A coldness, a withdrawal, a wound that seems disproportionate to whatever caused it. Because underneath the warmth, there was always a transaction. And when the transaction stops, the warmth has nowhere left to come from. In the years after the First World War, something shifted in how thinking people understood human relationships. An entire generation had watched the bonds between people, loyalty, decency, the things love was supposed to be made of, dissolve under pressure in ways that nobody had predicted. What that left, for those who were paying attention, was a question. Why, when people want love so desperately, do they so consistently fail to find it? A psychoanalyst named Erich Fromm spent much of his career trying to answer it. He built a practice, sat with people in the middle of their most intimate failures, and eventually arrived at a conclusion that was simple and, once heard, almost obvious. That most people approach love the way they approach ownership. That the beloved is experienced not as a person with their own interior life, but as a source of feeling, of confirmation, of a particular sense of self that becomes possible only when they love you back. Fromm called this loving in the having mode, and what he said against it was love as an activity, something practiced rather than possessed, something you do rather than something you hold. Fromm arrived at this in 1956, from a clinical practice in New York, drawing on psychoanalysis and his own long observation of human beings in close proximity to each other. And he was describing, with different language, exactly what the Buddha had described in the 5th century BC, in a completely different part of the world, drawing on meditation and direct observation of the mind. The having mode, tanha. A different word for the same thing. In 2005, a group of researchers wanted to know what was actually happening in the brain when people fell in love. They recruited volunteers, people who described themselves as intensely, recently in love, and put them in brain scanners. The procedure was simple. Each person would look at a photograph of the person they loved for 30 seconds, then count backwards from a large number to clear their mind, then look at a photograph of someone they barely knew, then count backwards again, cycling through this repeatedly while the scanner tracked what was happening in their brain. The lead researcher, Helen Fisher, expected to find activity in the regions associated with emotion. What she found instead was activity in the brain's reward and motivation circuitry, the same regions that respond to food when you are hungry, or to a substance when the body has learned to depend on it. Romantic love, in its early stages, is more a drive than it is an emotion. The beloved had become, neurochemically, a source of something the brain now needed, and the brain was doing what brains do with sources of things they need. It was tracking them. It was orienting toward them. It was generating anxiety about losing them. The feeling we have always called love, the consuming, electric, anxious thing, is, in its basic neural architecture, closer to hunger than to anything we would normally associate with care or tenderness. It is tanha. It is thirst. And thirst, however genuinely it is felt, is always about the one who is thirsty. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If tanha, this hunger, this drive, this need, is what most of us have been practicing, what would the alternative actually look like? Is there a way of loving someone that isn't, at its core, about yourself? Pali has a word for that too. Metta. Metta is usually translated as loving kindness, which is accurate but doesn't capture the full weight of it. It is closer to genuine goodwill, a sincere wish for another person's well-being that asks nothing back, that doesn't depend on how they feel about you, that has no transaction running underneath it. Most of us have felt it at some point, usually briefly, usually in moments when we weren't thinking about ourselves, watching someone we love do something they're good at, or hearing that something went well for them, and feeling glad in a way that has nothing to do with us. That is what metta feels like. The gladness that has nothing to do with you. You are walking somewhere, a path, a garden, somewhere outside, and you see a flower. It stops you. There is something about it, the way the light is catching it, the color of it, the way it is growing, and you feel a pull toward it that is immediate and uncomplicated. You want it. You want to have it. And so you reach down and pick it, and for a moment, you do have it. The color is right there in your hand, the scent is closer now, and there is a real pleasure in this, a genuine satisfaction in holding something beautiful. The wanting was real. The pleasure is real. But the flower, separated from its roots, is already changing. It will look the same for a little while, and then it will begin to close. and then it will be gone. The thing that moved you, the aliveness of it, the beauty of something growing in its own conditions, that thing ended the moment you took it. What you wanted was the experience the flower gave you, and the taking was the end of it. The other impulse, and it is a different impulse, genuinely different in kind, not just in degree, is the wish to see the flower keep growing. To come back tomorrow and find it more open than it was today. To notice what it needs, water when the soil is dry, shade when the sun is too strong, space to grow in the direction it grows rather than the direction you'd prefer. This impulse doesn't reach for the flower, it tends to it. And there is a pleasure in this too. A quieter pleasure, less immediate than the pleasure of taking, but in some ways deeper. The pleasure of watching something become more fully what it is, of being present to a life that is not your own without needing it to be. The gardener and the picker are standing in front of the same flower. Both are genuinely moved by what they see. The difference is the direction of the feeling. One is oriented toward what the flower gives. The other is oriented toward what the flower needs. And that difference, so simple when put this way, so difficult to actually live, is the difference between tanha and metta. Metta is what it feels like to love someone without needing them to be anything other than what they are, to want good things for them without needing to be the source of those good things, to be glad for them in a way that has nothing to do with you. It is, in the end, love that has stopped being about itself. Most of us have been on the receiving end of tanha without knowing what to call it. There have been people in our lives who loved us, genuinely in the way they understood love, and whose love had a quality to it that was subtly exhausting. The need to be a certain way around them, the sense that their warmth was conditional on something, though the condition was never quite named. The feeling of being seen, but only partially, seen for what you provided, for how you made them feel, for the version of themselves that your love made possible. It is a strange loneliness, being loved that way. Because the love is real, and the person means it, and you are still somehow alone inside it. When you love someone, the people closest to you, the ones you would say you love without hesitation, what is it you actually want for them? Not from them, for them. When you imagine their life going well, is that something you want independent of whether it includes you? When something good happens to them that has nothing to do with you, what do you feel? When they grow in a direction that takes them away from you, or need something you cannot give, or become someone slightly different from the person you fell in love with, what happens in you? Most of us will find tanha somewhere in our answers. The question is only whether we can see it clearly enough to know what we are actually doing when we love someone. The gardener who tends a single flower long enough begins to learn something that goes beyond that flower. What it means to pay attention to something that is not yourself. What it feels like to want something to thrive without needing to possess it. To find pleasure in watching a life unfold on its own terms. Over time, without any particular intention, that understanding extends to the next plant, and the one after that, and gradually to everything the gardener tends. What began as a relationship with one flower becomes a way of moving through the world. The garden grows, and the gardener, without having taken anything, ends up with more than they started with.